Good morning and welcome to session 5 of Thriving with Anxiety. I want to welcome you all today again and say please say hi in the taper and please make any comments and feel free to ask any questions and we'll put them together into a Q&A, sort of maybe a once-off that I will do a live session. And so if you've got any queries, contact me via my email address down below, my website, or through Facebook Messenger. You can private message me there as well. All right, so today we're going to be chatting a bit about unhelpful thinking styles. We're going to go through the whole, it's about 10 of them, and we're going to have a relook at them. Again, some of this has been covered in another session, but we're going to do this in a bit more detail and make it as part of this whole idea about anxiety and panic. So let's take a look at these unhelpful thinking styles. So when a person experiences an unhelpful emotion like depression or anxiety, it's usually preceded by a number of unhelpful self-statements, okay, or negative self-talk and thoughts. And often there's a pattern to such thoughts, and we call these unhelpful thinking styles or distorted thinking styles. And one of the things we've noticed is that people use these unhelpful thinking styles as an automatic habit. We don't even realize we're doing it. And it's something that happens beyond our awareness. So I've been stressing all along on conscious living, becoming more conscious, waking up, mindfulness. So when a person is consistently and constantly using these styles of thinking, they can often cause themselves a great deal of emotional distress. And they've got no idea where these thoughts are even coming from, or that they're even having these thoughts, because as we said in the previous two sessions, we just feel these feelings in our bodies without realizing that there's actually a belief system. Remember yesterday we did activating event plus belief plus the consequence. All right, so we're going to talk about these different 12 styles, and I'm going to go into them in more detail. We're going to talk about mental filtering, shoulding and musting, jumping to conclusions, overgeneralizations, personalizations, labeling, catastrophizing, emotional reasoning, black and white thinking, and magnification and minimization. So let's go into them in more detail. So let's look at firstly the mental filter, which we, in a fancy psychology word, is called selective abstraction, but mental filter. So this is a filtering in and a filtering out process. So you can think of it in terms of a mental filter, like a coffee filter, as a sort of tunnel vision. And it focuses only on one part of a situation and it ignores the rest. Usually this means looking at the negative parts of a situation and forgetting the positive parts. Here's an example. So maybe you're out with your partner having a romantic dinner, and at the end of the dinner you have a disagreement about whether to leave a tip or not. And perhaps you stew on this disagreement in the car all the way home. What do you think the effect of this thinking style will have on the way you feel? Notice that in this example you're dwelling on a single detail out of the many details of that evening. Okay? Notice that the detail that you're dwelling on happens to be negative. You've excluded other details of the whole picture, which means that you're not remembering all the other positive experiences of the night. And if you focus on this negative bit only, then it's likely that you're going to keep experiencing the negative feelings that go along with it. This process also happens with the way we remember things. All the memories of our life experiences are stored in our brains. And have you ever thought of what would happen if you remembered everything all at once? I think we'd be pretty overwhelmed. So it's natural that mental filtering occurs when we try and remember everything. And however, research has shown us that when a person is depressed, they often remember events that are associated with negative or unhelpful feelings. And if they keep dwelling on these memories, how do you think that would make them feel? All right. And whereas if they looked at the bigger picture, they'll see that good goes with the bad. It's not only bad, but we seem to filter out all the good events and only look at the bad parts of those events. And I think what I'd like you to do is, if you're going through this by yourself or you wanted to go through it slower, is after each of these negative thinking techniques or negative thinking styles that we're talking about, is you could draw yourself a graph on a piece of page or just a table, and across that table just write, can you think of a situation where you used this thinking style? What were your thoughts that went through your mind when you were thinking that particular thinking style? And what feelings did I experience as a consequence of that thinking? And it's a good way to jot these down as you're going through the video as we go through each of these styles. All right. Then jump into conclusions. This is a very common one, and many of us do this or make assumptions. Most of us would have heard the phrase, you jump into conclusions, meaning that a conclusion is being made without really knowing if there's any evidence to support it. And although we might like to think that we have a hunch about something and that it's usually right, there are times when we're not right. There are times when we keep jumping to the wrong conclusion or conclusions, and these are usually negative. So when we do this consistently, then we can cause ourselves quite a bit of distress. And there are two ways in which we often jump to conclusions: mind reading and predictive thinking or fortune telling. So mind reading, as the name suggests, is where we jump to conclusions because we assume that we know what someone else is thinking, or that we know the rationale behind someone else's behaviors. This happens to be a very common style of thinking. Have you ever had this experience? So you're talking to someone, and during the conversation, they look at their watch, and perhaps you thought they must think I'm a really boring person, or they don't want to be here with me. If you jump to these conclusions without looking closely at all the evidence, such as the fact that the person is expecting an important phone call soon, do you think you'd end up feeling happy or distressed? Let's try another example. You're walking along and start to feel lightheaded, so you reach out for the wall, and you look up to see someone glance over to you, and you think, they must think I'm crazy. If you believed your interpretation, which has been based on mind reading, again, how do you think you'd feel? So you'd feel embarrassed or ashamed, and this is not what the person was thinking. They might have been concerned. Often these conclusions are a reflection of how we think about ourselves. Example, I think I'm boring, I think I'm going crazy. And often we jump to this conclusion because we think poorly of ourselves, and then others must do that too, or we assume that others must think about myself in that same way, and that's not the case. Then predictive thinking. We can also jump to conclusions when we begin making predictions about what's going to happen on some future occasion. And this is very common, and it certainly increases our anxiety and stress. And these are often predictions where you overestimate the negative emotions or experiences that you're going to encounter. Think about this example. Your car's broken down, and perhaps you've got to catch now a taxi to work or a train to work, and you think, I'm going to have a panic attack, and I'm going to faint on the train, and I'm going to be trapped on this train, and no one's going to be able to come and rescue me. So you believe this, even though you've never fainted before. And think about how you might feel with this kind of over prediction. And of course, you're going to feel overly anxious if you think this kind of thought. Then personalization. Perhaps think of some occasions when something hasn't gone quite as what you wanted or the way that you'd expected, and you blamed yourself totally for what's happened. So the toast burns at breakfast, and you blame yourself, not the toaster. Your child plays a wrong note at a concert, and you blame yourself for not making practice harder. So without realizing, you relate external negative events to something that you have or have not done. So when you personalize something, you take total responsibility for these external events occurring, ignoring other important factors. And as a consequence, you end up blaming yourself for everything that goes wrong or that could go wrong, even when you can only be partly responsible or not responsible even at all. If you were to consistently say to yourself, this is my fault, I'm to blame, how do you think you'd start to feel? Carrying 100% of the responsibility is a rather large burden to bear, and one that's likely to leave you feeling discouraged or overwhelmed. Catastrophizing. This is also an extremely common distorted thinking pattern, often called drama queen or magnification. So when someone says you're blowing things out of proportion or you're making a mountain out of a molehill, chances are the person is catastrophizing. This style of automatic thinking often begins with the following phrases. No, but what if? Oh no. We see this over and over again now with COVID and lockdown. There's a lot of catastrophizing going, and I'm not trying to minimize or get into denial around COVID, but there's a lot of people that are catastrophizing this illness. So let's try some examples. Oh my God, I have a chest pain. I might be having a heart attack. Please help me. All right. What if I disagree with my partner on this? I'll lose an important relationship. I felt depressed this morning. What if I stay depressed? These are all examples of catastrophizing. All these examples get the essence of this unhelpful thinking style, that the person views the situation as a terrible, awful, dreadful, or horrible event. And notice that the appearance of other unhelpful thinking styles, sort of the bit of predictive thinking and a bit of jumping to conclusions, also comes into the catastrophizing idea or distorted thinking pattern. Let's have a look at this final example. Perhaps you've got to climb a flight of stairs, and when you start to reach the top, you're feeling lightheaded and breathless, and you think, oh no, I'm going to faint, or I'll fall down the stairs and get concussion, and there's no one around to help me. I'm going to be left here to die, or even worse, I'm going to be in a coma for years. What do you think it would be like for someone with this style of thinking? Even though the reality is that it's unlikely, when we catastrophize, things can get very big very quickly, and we can work ourselves up to a point where it all seems beyond our control, because one thought just spins into another thought and feeling, thought, feeling, thought, feeling, thought, feeling. And I've spoken at length around this quicksand metaphor where it sucks us down into panic mode. Then black and white thinking. This is also an extremely destructive thinking style. When it comes to sports, you might have heard some people say there are no second places, there's only one winner and the rest are losers, as if being second best in the world is nothing to be proud of. Or think of the student who doesn't get straight A's and thinks that they're a failure. Perhaps you've said something similar to yourself. If my partner and I don't always agree, then we have a bad relationship. Or if I'm not the best at what I do, then I'm worthless. I've worked with many couples where there's black and white thinking in one of the partners, and that partner only thinks of the relationship in terms of bad or good. There's no middle ground, and they don't understand that there's a continuum that moves between A and B. So some days is good, some days is bad, but there's also middle ground. But to a black and white thinker, it's either good all bad, and it can never be in between that. So we call this all or nothing thinking, or black and white thinking, because you tend to see only one extreme or the other. And with this thinking, you're either right or wrong, good or bad. There are no in-betweens, no shades of grey, and absolutely no middle ground. And it's very difficult to resolve, because a black and white thinker also, unfortunately, can never be wrong. So one cannot argue, in a sense, with black and white thinking. Some of the should-haves or musts we talk about this tyranny of shoulds or the tyranny of musts. It's quite common in everyday language to hear people say, I should do this, or I must do this, and make these kind of statements. And it's not necessarily unhelpful to think these. I should get my work in on time, or I should keep to the speed limit. It only becomes unhelpful when you use should or must statements to put unreasonable demands or pressure on yourself. We might say, I should always get things right, or I must never get upset with my partner, or I should always cook exquisite meals. So how do you think someone would feel after making these kind of statements over and over again? Chances are they'll feel guilty or disappointed in themselves, and never feel good enough. So we might also use these type of statements when we're talking about other people. She should know better than that. People should always keep their promises. People shouldn't get angry at others. You might have guessed that these kind of statements leave us feeling extremely frustrated or angry or disappointed in others too. Then, overgeneralizations. The key element in this unhelpful thinking style is to take one instance in the here and now and to impose this on all future situations. Perhaps you've said to yourself in the past, this is just so typical, telling yourself that this is how things always are, or everyone's like this, or things never turn out well for me, when in fact there are only a few examples to go by. So making these broad, generalized, and global conclusions on the basis of only a little evidence can leave us thinking that things are really uncontrollable, inevitable, and out of our hands. A sense of helplessness often accompanies these overgeneralizations, and if you think about personal relationships, you might notice a few overgeneralizations, such as, have you ever said or heard something like, you never do anything romantic for me. I always have to take out the garbage. Everyone keeps having a go at me. Or every night I come home, the kids have left a mess. So notice that these unhelpful thinking styles often include words like all, never, always, and every, when in most cases, the always and never are not as solid as we might think they are. How do you think people would feel if they used this style of thinking? They may feel frustrated, discouraged, depressed, or annoyed, amongst other things. Labeling. You can probably think of many times when you've bumped something, or someone has knocked a drink over or dropped a glass while they were washing the dishes, and perhaps thought to yourself, I'm such an idiot. Or perhaps a friend doesn't call you to say they can't make it to your birthday party, and you think they're so inconsiderate. It's a little like overgeneralizing about people. So when we make global statements about ourselves or other people which are based on behavior in specific situations, then we're labeling. The problem is that by defining a person by one specific behavior, and usually one that we consider negative, we ignore the other positive characteristics or actions of that person. So when you step back from the situation and take a closer look, you might realize that breaking a glass doesn't mean that you're an idiot. And the fact that you're competent in your job or can communicate effectively with your family might suggest otherwise. Similarly, your friend might have acted kind and considerate at other times, but something might have prevented them from calling. Then emotional reasoning. This is a style of unhelpful thinking where you base your views on the situation, yourself or others, on the way that you're feeling. Have you ever felt anxious about something and thought to yourself, I know this isn't going to work out well, and everything turned out just fine? If you have, it's likely that you're using emotional reasoning. In this case, we tend to take our emotions as being evidence for the truth. For example, you might be walking down the street and think, I feel anxious, I know something dangerous is going to happen. Or I feel so depressed, this must be the worst place to work in. It's like we're saying to ourselves, I feel, therefore it is. Rather than looking at what is the real evidence. It's a little bit like judgment that we're looking at through a filter. Okay? So there might be other evidence or no other evidence to suggest that something dangerous is going to happen, or that it's the worst place to work. It's the only evidence that you're using for this emotional reasoning is based on how you feel. And then lastly, magnification and minimization. So this is the binocular effect of thinking. Often it means that you enlarge, magnify the positive attributes of some people and shrink or minimize your own attributes. Just like looking at the world through either end of the same pair of binoculars and disqualifying your own attributes for achievement would have negative effects. So thinking about it, we all talk about like discounting compliments as well. So the minute we disqualify our own attributes or anything that we've done well, we seem to think bad of it. So think of times in your own life where you might have said or heard others say, oh, that doesn't count, I was just lucky. Or they don't really mean it, they were just being polite. Or what do you think they want from me? In this way, you might water down these positive experiences and even transform them into negative ones. It's as though you're being humble, or so humble rather, that you're putting yourself down. So let's have a quick summary. Often there's a trend or pattern to these negative, unhelpful thoughts, and this can be considered as unhelpful thinking styles. These thinking styles are unhelpful because they often focus on the negative or the inaccurate part of reality. And here are some of the quick descriptions of these 10 unhelpful thinking styles again. We're just going to go through them again quickly. So the mental filter is a filtering in or filtering out process, a sort of tunnel vision that focuses only on one part of the situation and ignores the rest. And usually this means looking at the negative parts and forgetting the positive parts, not seeing the whole picture. Jumping to conclusions. This assumes that we know what someone else is thinking, mind reading, and then we make predictions about what's going to happen in the future. We call that predictive thinking. Personalization is blaming yourself or taking 100% responsibility for the occurrence of external events when it's not your fault or not all your fault. Catastrophizing, this is the drama queen, blowing things out of proportion. Black and white thinking, seeing only one extreme or the other, no in between, no shade of grey. Shoulding and musting, the tyranny of musts, making unreasonable demands or pressure on yourself or others. Overgeneralizations, taking one instance in the past or present and imposing it on all current or future situations. Labeling, making global statements about ourselves and others based on their behavior or our behavior in specific situations. Emotional reasoning, basing our view of situations on our view on ourselves, on the way we're feeling. And then magnification and minimization, magnifying the positive attributes of other people and minimizing our own attributes. So I want to thank you for joining me. In tomorrow's session, we're going to look at how we can challenge these unhelpful thoughts and unhelpful thinking styles. So have a great day, and we'll catch up tomorrow. Take care.